Good morning. It is so good to be back here. I was just with you all, I believe, last month. It's good to see some familiar faces. And yes, I am the youngest minister in the movement. And you know what? There are 9 of us under 40. Yay! Yeah, that's... Yay! And it's just an opportunity for us to hold a higher vision and an intention for young people to want to be involved in this philosophy and this teaching. What I'm finding out in the world is that the young people really do crave spirituality and connection and community just like all of us do. It's just how to get them in the door. So I'm really grateful to Abigail for asking me to be here. I know that last month you guys covered the shadow, and I told her, I said, I'm going to be back the next month talking about the shadow. And if you guys remember, last month I was here, I kind of gave you a warm-up. Yes, some of you remember. And so my topic today is called The Sacred Amidst the Shadow. I have been on a speaking tour for the last 6 months, and it's been an incredible opportunity to get to see different communities and peoples. And they have a saying that you teach what you most need to learn. So what I'm finding in my teaching and my lecturing or speaking is that, of course, everything that I'm teaching is showing up in my life. And it's showing up not just in the micro in my life, but it's showing up in the world. And so this question this week, especially because of the current events of what's going on in the world, the question that's been coming up in my mind is, how do we reconcile the events of today with new thought? We, as Centers for Spiritual Living, function under the umbrella of what's called new thought, and it's actually not new at all. It's just we've come and brought this ancient teaching with new light upon it, shedding new light for the modern world. So taking these teachings and really making them applicable for my life and your life today. And so when I speak about new thought, it's really just about creating a new paradigm, a new consciousness, a new life, a new way of thinking, as you mentioned earlier. And so the question has become, well, how do I reconcile that amidst the violence and the chaos and the craziness that's going on in the world? Many of us are going through a shift and transformation. You know, fall is always the time of year where we go into the darkness, right? It's some of the darkest time of the year. And in the midst of chaos and separation and turmoil, we have a tendency to isolate and separate. We have a tendency to await what's the spring when the harvest comes, right? And so my hope today is that my talk brings you some inspiration to move through whatever it is you're going through in your life right now with ease and grace. With grace. Sometimes it's grace that carries us through the most painful and difficult moments. And that you're able to at least come into an awareness that there's something greater happening in your life. And maybe you can't even see it yet. So how do we embrace the darkness, the loss, the unknown when it shows up on our doorstep? So I believe that everything starts in consciousness. Everything starts in what we call first cause. Consciousness, that my vibration and your vibration matters, that we are all connected. Because we're all connected, my actions affect everyone else on the planet, which is why you can see on the greater scale of things when the terrorist attacks happened in Paris, they affected the entire planet. But not only that, the day before that in Beirut, Lebanon, they affected the entire planet. And even the day before that in the Sinai in Egypt, they affected the whole planet. Not just the social media craze of changing your Facebook profile. You see, I sat with that for days because it was so painful of thinking, you know, we have a selective way of mourning, but we get to create a new thought. Have you noticed we have a selective way of mourning? What about this group? And what about this group? And what about this country? And what about this country? And it's like, well, if we believe that God is all there is, and that there's only one thing happening, which is the only activity of life, of spirit, of God, that we are all contained in the allness of the one, then everything that's happening in the world is of the one. Ah, that's deep work. That's real work. How do I see everything that's happening on the planet as part of the whole? As part of the one? Many people, I feel, are asleep. They're wounded. Many of us are triggered by the world of effect of what's going on in the outside world. We think that our good is out there. We think that our joy, that our peace, that our love, that everything is outside of ourselves. So many of us are looking to the outside for our gratification, for our approval, for our worth. But what we understand is that everything is an inside job. You've heard this. Everything is an inside job, and we're like, darn it. Who can I blame? So last September, I had the incredible opportunity to go back to Ukraine for a 6th time. And if you've been following the news, there has been a revolution going on there. And the minister there called me at the very last minute. And she said, Savanna, I can't be at this peace conference. Would you mind filling in for me? I said, well, when is it? She says, oh, it's in 5 days. I said, wow, well, you do know what's going on there, right? She said, absolutely. But you know our community, you know the language, you know the people. I really need your support. And I thought, well, okay. You know how sometimes spirit nudges you? There's like this intuition that says you need to do something, and you don't quite know why, and you think you're nuts. Like, why would I want to go in the midst of a revolution right now? Although I'm not unfamiliar to revolution, having lived in Egypt during it. But there was something within me that said, do it. So here I am at SFO, and I'm standing at the platform, and I'm about to check in. And there's a sweet, lovely couple ahead of me, and they're flying to Hawaii. And the gate checker looks at them, and he says, have an incredible trip. It's so beautiful. You're going to have the best time. You know what's coming. And I walk up to the platform, and he looks at my itinerary. He looks down, he looks at me, and he says, are you sure you want to go there? I said, I've gotten all of my courage up to get to this moment. Yes, I'm going to Ukraine. And I'll share what happened here in a moment. But I want to look at shadow. What is the shadow? You know, we throw this word around sometimes. What is the darkness? What is the shadow? The intrinsic dark side. The shadow, by definition, is a dark area or shape produced by a body coming between rays of light and a surface. Metaphysically, we look at it as the hidden or the disowned aspects of ourselves. It's the parts of us that we don't like. It's the parts of us that we don't want anybody to know about. It's the secrets, it's the shame, it's the depression. It's the ways in which we hide. It's the ways in which we allow ourselves to remain small. And what happens, if you'll notice, is that when those things aren't brought to the surface for healing and transformation, they tend to come out sideways. And they come out in all sorts of ways in our families and our relationships with our coworkers on the road. And it's not pretty. And so the way in which we embrace the darkness is that we look at it. We have to look at it. And most of us don't want to look at it, do we? Because it's too uncomfortable. We don't want to look at that stuff. We don't want to look at the secrets. We don't want to look at the collective shame. We don't want to look at the past. But what we understand is that when we look at it and we bring light to it, we can see that there's a gift in what it's providing us, that we don't have to live by it. We have a saying also, Ernest Holmes, I believe, said this, that, or actually Einstein might have said it before him, that that the past is not based on the precedent. So whatever happened in your past does not define this moment. It doesn't just define what can be, of what can be created. So many of us are looking to the world for external validation. We're looking outside of ourselves, when really it's about coming back into alignment with who we are. That everything that we need and everything that we hope for and desire is already right here. There's nothing out there. There's nothing out there or no one out there that can determine who I am or how I express myself in the world. Michael Beckwith, who is Reverend Michael, who is the minister at the Agape International Spiritual Center in Los Angeles, he says that the power within you is greater than the power in the world. The power within you is greater than the power within the world. So here I am in Switzerland. I've made it to Switzerland. And by that point, if you've ever traveled the world, you're a little bit delirious and you just want to get to where you're going. And so I board the plane to head to Ukraine, and it's half empty. There is no one going into Ukraine. I'm like it. And of course, I start to panic and think a whole number of things, and all of my training over the last 13 years just went right out the window, and I started just making up stories. Do you guys make up stories? About what could happen, or what is gonna happen, or what if this happens? Oh my gosh, it was like one of my 4 agreements: do not make up stories, okay? I started thinking the worst possible thing that could happen, and the gentleman next to me probably thought I was nuts because I started chanting a mantra. It was the only thing that could bring me back, because prayer was not saving me. It was a long 5 hours. And my mantra was, there's only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. You know it. There's only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. So I said this over and over and over until I got to the airport, and I was greeted by friends and family. It's like my second home. And they took me off into the conference site, which was in this wooded area, and you would have never known that a war was going on. And on one of the evenings there, I brought this nurturing process that I've done over the years with our teens at teen camp, at our Science of Mind camps. And if you know Soviet history, 10 years ago, when I first came into Ukraine, I tried to do this process with our young adults there, and they said, Savanna, we do not touch each other. We are not going to do this exercise. I said, can you just be willing to just open, just try? And these were 18 to 25-year-olds, and so I did this process with them, and they just sobbed. It was the first time that they had experienced this level and this depth of love before. And so you can imagine now, 11, 12 years later, that's all they want to do. And they're waiting for it. And of course, our kids back home here in the States love it because they just get to touch each other and they think it's so amazing. So this process is called AB Love. And it's a process where you have 2 groups of people. The first group of people stands in the center of a circle, and they have their eyes closed and their hands are down at their side. And the second group of people comes in, and they basically show them love by the nature of hugs, by positive affirmation and reinforcement. And so we started this process, and the sun was setting, and there were candles all lit on the ground. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see a group of people walking towards me. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, this is a public event. What are we going to do? And all of a sudden, these little ones, 5, 6 years old, came into our circle with no instruction from me, closed their eyes with their hands down, and experienced this process. It's like they hadn't forgotten who they are. And what I found out later after this experience is that these were Eastern Ukrainian refugees who had been displaced because of the war in Ukraine, and they were there to live for the time being. And so I got to hear their stories. And I left there asking myself, Savanna, were you put here by divine appointment? Absolutely. And so I say this to you to reiterate the idea that there is a silver lining, that there is the light, that there is something in the midst of the darkest time. I could have never planned that. I couldn't have even made it up. And so we look at darkness as a gift. You know, people are triggers. People trigger us, don't they? They trigger us, and they allow us to see all the unhealed aspects of ourselves if we're so willing to go there. And I think that they serve as mirrors. They're mirrors for our greater growth and healing. They provide contrast, just like the light and the dark does, just like the darkness provides contrast. Michael Beckwith has a saying. He says, the unknown has been thwarted by your togetherness. The worst day in the life for your ego is the best day in the life for your soul. The worst day in the life for your ego is the best day in the life for your soul. Why? Because it forces you to have to leap into the unknown. It forces you out of your comfort zone. It forces you to have to be creative and innovative about what you're experiencing in life. So as someone mentioned earlier, I had this incredible opportunity for this to happen. Have any of you read it? Did any of you get a chance to read it? This is still humbling for me, even now. It happened last February. And it's humbling for so many reasons because of how I got to this point, which I will share in a moment. But the other cool thing is that now that I have this, I can quote myself. So I'm going to. So from this article, I said, we must trust the creativity of the darkness, the holy unknown places, for they bear rich fruit when we've released our attachment to the way that things must be. We embrace the shadow by taking self-responsibility. The word, self-responsibility. Many of us don't like this. We would like to blame the outside world. We'd like to blame the other for our feelings of inadequacy or depression or whatever it may be. But what's great about this teaching is that it aids us in taking self-responsibility. We get to co-create our life. And in some ways it's empowering. In other ways it means we get to do some work. We get to do some inner work. We cannot control the actions and the behaviors of others, but we can take responsibility for the garbage that's in our own minds, for the garbage that we create in our own lives, for the shadow that's showing up in our lives and in our communities. And so we get to ask ourselves in the midst of our own life, but also what's going on in the world. What is mine to do, Spirit? Some days I wake up in the morning and I ask the question, where can I be used today? What is mine to do today? It's an empowering feeling. So back in 2012, I was living in Egypt, and it was a very volatile time, as you can imagine. If any of you remember the Arab Spring and then Tahrir Square, and it was thousands and thousands of people. And I can remember living there was such a challenging time because I would leave the apartment and I would be followed or harassed daily. And I never knew what was going to happen from one minute to the next. And can you imagine just living in this volatility of never knowing what was going to happen at any moment? And I remember walking through the streets to the market by myself, and everything in me felt rageful. It was like this anger and rage that I had never known before. I couldn't pinpoint it. I said, why am I so angry? What is this showing up right now? Through all of my practitioner training and everything, I said, I'm in ministerial school. Like this, how is this happening? I'm so peaceful. But you see, it was perfect for me because all the distractions were gone. All the distractions of media and technology and comforts of this home here in the United States has kept me safe, has kept me small. And so I was able to finally see myself, to be so exposed that I was forced to look at the rage. What is this rage about? And it was this little one just wanting attention. And so what that provided me was an opportunity. It provided me the opportunity to write and to use my writing as a catalyst for change and for my own inner growth. I was doing inner child work, and my beloved at the time who was living with me said, "You are crazy. What is going on with you?" And what was happening is that what you see in the outside world of effect is just a direct reflection of what's going on internally. And so it was an opportunity and a gift for me to actually do the shadow work. So I started to write. And when I came back to the States, I was in my last ministerial class, and I was so ready to get out of school. And the publisher of Science and Mind magazine was my professor, and he said, "I want you to write an article that you would have published." And so I submitted something I had written so vulnerably at such a dark, rageful place in my life in Egypt. And 3 months later, I get a call from the editor. And she says, "Savanna, we loved your article so much, we would really love to publish it for the Revolution anniversary. And we want to put you on the cover. Is that okay?" Is that okay? And so you see, it's launched my career in such a magical and amazing way, a humbling way, that I can use that. You never know how a dark experience or challenge is going to shape your life. And doesn't it all shape us? I mean, can you look back on your life and see that every single thing you've experienced thus far was needed for your growth, was needed for the next thing? to make you who you are. It's part of the tapestry of life. We need it. We need the dark to give us contrast, to allow us to grow. So the last way in which we embrace the shadow is we build our faith muscles. That means that we cultivate qualities within us that are needed to move through these times. Maybe it's a deeper trust in life. Maybe it's a surrender. Maybe it's a greater patience with people and with yourself. Maybe it's a deep compassion with yourself and with others. They say that the 5 people that you hang out with the most, you start to become. Who are those people in your life? Perception is everything. I put my attention where I want my life to be. So I look at where I'm not in alignment with that, and then I make amends and I make adjustments. I forgive myself. And we give gratitude. We give gratitude for all of life's struggles. I know you guys have been doing a theme for your community over the last month or so, and gratitude is such an important spiritual practice. Giving gratitude for all of it, even the dark stuff. Tony Robbins says that one reason so few of us achieve what we truly want is that we never direct our focus. We never concentrate our power. So where is your attention these days? Where is your focus? Is it on what's not working? Or is it on what's possible? Is it on where you can grow deeper? So lastly, I was going down the Nile, and we were heading out into my beloved's village at the time. And at that time, it was really crazy because there was a gas shortage, and we couldn't find a taxi to take us. So we eventually found a young kid who was willing to take us. And as we're going out into the desert, there's a checkpoint. And this is common in Egypt. There's checkpoints everywhere. And so we start to get to the checkpoint, and just as we're getting there, and the guy starts to roll over the checkpoint to go through, his car stalls. And it was immediately a red flag. So the policemen are all there with huge armed, guns. And they see a foreigner in the back seat and an Egyptian with her. So of course they think he's kidnapping me. So I'm like, well, this is going to be interesting. So here we are. The guy asked for his ID, and of course it's expired. Like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get out of this one? And at this point, I've lived in Egypt long enough that I know that a little talking and some patience goes a long way. And so I kept my mouth shut, and I just internally said a prayer to myself as the men were circling our car. And he got out, my beloved got out, and they started speaking to him for a very long time. And eventually, they start laughing. I'm like, okay, good sign. He gets back into the car, and we get to where we're going, and I know not to ask any questions until we reach our destination. And I said, how did you get out of that? Like, what happened? He said, well, I just told him that I work for the UN and that I was an ambassador to Egypt, and he believed me. The funny thing is, he did believe him, and at the time did not work for he worked for the UN, but he was not of such high regard as they had thought. But the guy believed him. So we managed to get out of that situation in a very interesting way. I say that because you never know what life's going to bring you. You never know what quality you're being asked to cultivate to move through an experience. You never know. For me, aggressiveness served me well. Assertiveness served me well living in that country because it allowed me to move through difficult experiences. So what is it that you're being called to cultivate? What is yours to do? What is it that wants to be brought into the light into your own life? Or maybe it's something that's been in hiding that wants to be uncovered. And that's actually what we're going to be doing this afternoon in the workshop. We're going to be uncovering that stuff. So in closing, I leave you with this quote by Rumi, who's one of my favorite poets. He says, "The wound is the place where light enters you. Be patient where you sit in the dark. The dawn is coming."